there will be pressure on him probably to either take a little bit of a swing at Trump or perhaps enter the race sooner than maybe he wanted to in order to do that. But we are seeing some softening, I think, for Trump on that issue in particular.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by White House reporter Katherine Doyle. Katherine, we're looking at the Republican presidential campaign. There's a candidate who's not yet declared, but people are saying maybe his campaign is already going through growing pains before it even starts. Who are we talking about and what's the issue?
Some people, some Republican strategists are looking at Ron DeSantis and they're wondering where exactly his campaign, his putative campaign stands as Trump sort of knocks him around on a bunch of issues. The governor has answered a few questions recently about a foreign policy issue and then seemed to slightly move away from his position and then move back towards it in a way that drew blowback each time. And has people wondering exactly who's advising him where his bench is on these issues and whether he's prepared to mount a national campaign if he's having trouble at this stage ironing out his answers on an issue that other people are not having the same difficulties with.
Right, and that issue is the war in Ukraine, Russia's war in Ukraine, and most of the candidates have taken a position that's pretty favorable to a large, or at least Joe Biden-sized, U.S. role in that conflict. Former President Donald Trump has taken a diametrically opposed view on that, wants to avoid World War III, he says, and could end the war in 24 hours if you return him to the White House. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis kind of looked like he was inching toward Trump, and then when people got upset with him, maybe he inched a little bit back towards Nikki Haley and company?
He seemed to dismiss the war as a territorial dispute. Those were the words that he used in a questionnaire that he answered. And then when he got a lot of blowback from Republicans, he did a couple of other interviews that seemed to pull that back a little bit.
I mean, it's always a little tough when you're a governor of a state, and even an important state like Florida, to then sort of transition into these foreign policy questions, because there's not a huge foreign policy component to being a governor. So could that put him at a disadvantage, given that he's running against a former president, hoping to get the right to run against a sitting president? Is that going to maybe just be a systemic disadvantage for him?
It's hard to say at this point. There are other candidates that didn't answer the question. I mean, I think that if you are sure-footed in what you're saying, then maybe you wouldn't receive the same kind of scrutiny that he has.
Right. I mean, there's also just the backdrop of it's a little unclear how Republicans may feel about some of these issues, if whether Trump changed a large part of the base's foreign policy viewpoint, or whether a lot of Republicans are really more aligned with the Bush era type foreign policy, as appears to be the case with some declared and rumored candidates who actually worked for Trump on these issues.
The polling is sort of confusing on the issue. I mean, most Republicans, according to recent polls, say that they have that the U.S. should be helping Ukraine in the war. But there are also polls that suggest that they don't think that this should go on indefinitely. That seems to be the position that many Republicans are taking. It may be slightly different than some of the other candidates in the race. But DeSantis's pretty declarative statement of a territorial dispute and firm stance on on the U.S. role in the conflict seemed a little bit more forthright than what many Americans perhaps believe, though there are people who do.
You mentioned Trump knocking DeSantis around. I mean, that's obviously an unusual tactic for the former president, to really be aggressive in his attacks on people who may not even be in the race against him. Does DeSantis need to do something? I mean, because he's, up to this point, he's starting to experiment with some counterpunching, but he's largely tried to stay above the fray. And he's in this unusual position of, he's kind of trying to run as somebody kind of like Trump. He's not trying to draw too strong a contrast with Trump other than in his execution. Is that strategy working, or is he going to have to do something else probably?
There will be pressure on him probably to either take a little bit of a swing at Trump or perhaps enter the race sooner than maybe he wanted to in order to do that. But we are seeing some softening, I think, for Trump on that issue in particular. When he was at a rally recently, among the points that got less of a response from the crowd were his attacks on Ron DeSantis. So I think that there's some views that perhaps people don't like it that he's attacking a popular governor that is generally well liked in the party and who isn't even a declared candidate.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so this may be different than the last time Trump tried this strategy with another once very well regarded Florida Republican governor.
He tried it and was pretty effective at this with Jeb Bush
mm-hmm.
in the 2016 race, and he was aggressive with other candidates, and it worked out well for him there too. But I think there's some speculation that perhaps the fact that DeSantis isn't a declared candidate, he's not even in the race at this point,
mm-hmm.
that might turn some people off. DeSantis, for his part, has really tried to eliminate any sort of daylight between the two of them in terms of policy issues.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think he hopes, will allow him to pick up voters that otherwise could have gone for Trump but are tired of some of the theatrics and some of the aggression that they're seeing displayed now, for instance, against the governor.
Right. I mean, there is an argument that by going after DeSantis so relentlessly and frequently so personally, that Trump is actually making DeSantis's case for him a little bit.
That's exactly the point that perhaps they think, or people on DeSantis's team are hoping will resonate with people. You know, that he's somebody who can steer the country and that he is not prone to these sorts of outbursts in the same way. So that electing him or nominating him would be putting someone in charge who isn't going to distract from the policy objectives that people might like with these sorts of actions.
So you're saying that tear down Ron might not be as much of a crowd pleaser as build the wall?
Well, we'll see. It's hard to say at this point. I mean, a lot can happen between now and the first debate if they both make it to one.
Thank you, Katherine. You can read Katherine and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.